Long before we even had the official kit leaks for Dan Heng Permancer Terai, leakers were constantly spreading the same single rumor about his kit. Dan Heng PT is made for Phainon. Dan Heng PT is the missing puzzle piece for Phainon teams. Sarudra and Dan Heng PT are going to finally make Phainon feel complete. And while it always sounded crazy to me that a supposed sustain unit was going to complete Phainon's teams, it did make some amount of sense. Phainon has a trace specifically dedicated to buffing him when he receives a shield. And we also heard rumors that Dan Heng's element was changed from fire to physical, specifically so that he can synergize better with Phainon and benefit from fighting enemies that are weak to physical when paired with Phainon. Even this crazy rumor has some merit to it, considering the early silhouette of Dan Heng's original design from the initial Euphoria's trailer seems very fire themed. He was presumably changed from a fire preservation character to a physical preservation character. With all of these leaks and rumors seeming to line up with concrete information, it was believable that he really would be the final piece of Phainon's teams. And as such, I, along with many others, were looking forward to him with this specific expectation in mind. So now that his kit has been officially revealed, I can't help but wonder, were we bamboozled by leakers? Because this is not the kit of a character meant to synergize with Phainon. It's not just because he's a sustain who can't keep up with the buffs of a third harmony unit, and it's not that he has a bad kit or anything. I actually think his kit is really cool and well designed. No, the issue runs even deeper. The core mechanic of Dan Heng's kit, as in the actual way his kit has been coded to work in the game's engine, literally does not work with Phainon. There are no buffs they can give Dan Heng in the beta that can make him work with Phainon, and I will explain why. For starters, let's go over everything Dan Heng is offering to Phainon. Things that might make him look like an alright final teammate for Phainon at first glance. First off, obviously having a shield in Phainon teams is nice. If there's any character that does not need a sustain on the team, it's Phainon. He is the premier sustainless DPS. The DPS that enables players who would never be able to run sustainless teams to finally manage to dabble into the sustainless playstyle. But even so, having the option to have a shielder is nice and comfy, especially if the shielder is offering more to the team, which Dan Heng is. Dan Heng needs to compete with a third buffer for Phainon if he wants to be worthwhile. Other sustains don't need to compete nearly as hard as Dan Heng does when it comes to being a best in slot for their respective teams, all because of what I just mentioned about Phainon having an easier time running sustainless teams to begin with. So if a sustain wants to earn a spot on a team that can replace them more easily than other teams, they need to carry their weight. The only form of buffing within Dan Heng PT's actual kit is the attack buff tied to his dragon summon, which goes to whoever he attaches it to. This attack buff is based on Dan Heng's own attack, so if you build him correctly with attack main stats, it generally ends up being around a 500 attack buff. You could think of this as being fairly similar to a Phainon attack buff. So already, he actually does have some buffing capabilities that rivals a harmony unit, albeit one of the weaker harmony units in terms of pure damage buffing. Outside of that, the rest of his buffing comes in the form of his synergy with Sunday. Sunday's skill can't give its full buff to a character unless that character has a summon. So since Dan Heng PT attaches a summon to Phainon and allows Phainon to behave as if he has ownership over the summon, Phainon is now able to benefit from that juicy extra 50% damage bonus from Sunday's skill that he isn't able to get in any other way aside from using Dan Heng on the team. When you add this with the 45% damage bonus that Phainon gets from his shielding trace, this puts Dan Heng PT's overall buffing value for Phainon at around 500 attack and 95% damage bonus. This is already better than Phainon. Dan Heng also offers some personal damage, although it's nothing crazy, especially in single target scenarios, but it is something to mention that helps him compete with the likes of Branya, since the main difference between them now is just the 50% crit damage from Branya's ultimate. So all in all, this seems pretty respectable for a character who is also making the team immortal, right? Well, yes. Dan Heng PT is definitely Phainon's best teammate if you need the comfort. The only other sustain that really competes is Huohuo, and her buffs just aren't quite on the same level as Dan Heng's. It should be noted that if you don't own Sunday, then obviously Dan Heng's value diminishes because he's no longer enabling the extra damage percent from Sunday's skill, thus causing his buffing power to fall more in line with Huohuo once more. But either way, the fact that he's essentially a stronger Phainon in terms of buffing while also offering shields thicker than a character's entire HP bar and decent personal damage in AoE is pretty nice. I don't think Dan Heng is a teammate that you should never run with Phainon in any scenario. He's not Yukong levels of terrible. So in that sense, hooray! Leakers were onto something with their rumors about Dan Heng being good with Phainon. However, none of this has anything to do with Dan Heng synergizing with Phainon. If a character is supposed to be the missing puzzle piece of a team, that character needs to have actual synergy with that DPS, such as Hyacine's crazy stack generation for Castor's ultimate, or Lingsha and Galgar just straight up having a break effect vulnerability debuff in their kits. Everything we've discussed so far is all because of Dan Heng having such perfect synergy with Sunday specifically, a synergy that can be taken advantage of by many DPSs who aren't Phainon, oftentimes doing so even better than Phainon does. I'm looking at you, Anaxa. We'll talk about you later. So, at the current moment, moment, Dan Heng can fit into Phainon teams not because he's good for Phainon, but simply because Dan Heng is a good sustain in general. So then, what makes a sustain, or just a third teammate in general, synergize with Phainon? The answer is Core Flame stack generation. That is what causes a unit to synergize with Phainon or not. How many stacks for Phainon's ultimate are they able to generate? How comfortably are they able to generate it? And how quickly? This is what separates characters that synergize with Phainon from characters that just happen to be good with Phainon because they're strong characters in general, such as Tribby. And when we look at Dan Heng's Core Flame stack generation, it is ding ding ding, that's right, it's nowhere to be found. Dan Heng's skill gives a stack for Phainon, and that's all. He has no other ways of giving stacks. Not even his ultimate gives stacks for Phainon, when the likes of Huohuo gives 2 stacks from her ultimate alone. Yes, even Huohuo gives more stacks for Phainon. So in that sense, you could say even Huohuo synergizes with Phainon more than Dan Heng, and the only reason Dan Heng beats her out is just because his baseline kit has stronger synergy with Sunday specifically. But wait, what about his Dragon Summon? Every time it takes action, it applies a shield to the whole team, right? Just like his skill? And his skill still gives a stack. Even Aventurine's shield still gives a stack for Phainon. So why doesn't Dan Heng's Dragon Summon give a stack to Phainon every time it takes action and gives Phainon a shield? Well, we finally arrived at the main issue with Dan Heng's kit as it pertains to Phainon. Dan Heng's summon is not coded to give Phainon a stack. Yes, you heard me right. And no, this isn't a bug. A lot of people don't quite understand how Phainon's stack generation works in terms of how it's coded in the game. Phainon's talent states that he gains a stack of Core Flame every time he is targeted by an ability. This is the key phrasing, every time he is targeted. Well, what does it mean to be targeted by an ability? It's vague, since the Dragon Summon is technically targeting Phainon when it gives him a shield, right? Wrong. What Phainon's talent is actually saying is that anytime an ability clicks on Phainon, he gains a Core Flame stack. This means you have to be actively clicking on Phainon's character model in the game in order to give him a Core Flame stack. If an ability allows you to click on his character model to activate the ability, then it gives him a Core Flame stack. If the ability does not let you click on Phainon's character model to activate it, then it doesn't give him a Core Flame stack. See Branya's skill? It clicks on Phainon's character model, thus giving a Core Flame stack. See Branya's ultimate? It also clicks on Phainon's character model. See Ron May's skill? It doesn't allow you to click on Phainon's character model. However, Ron May's ultimate does allow you to click on Phainon's character model, thus giving a stack. Huohuo's skill and ultimate also click on Phainon. Aventurine's skill clicks on Phainon. When it comes to whether an ability will or will not give Phainon stacks, don't think about it in terms of what the ability actually does. Think about it in terms of how you activate it. What characters are you able to click when you activate the ability? Because that is the only thing that determines whether or not it can give Core Flame stacks for Phainon. Imagine a character has an ability that literally does nothing for allies and only attacks enemies, but it still lets you click on Phainon for some reason to activate the ability. It would give a Core Flame stack even though it's literally doing nothing for Phainon. Now imagine an ability like Tribby's skill that gives all-type res pen to the entire team, but you can only activate it by clicking on Tribby herself. It won't give Core Flame stacks for Phainon. All that matters is the ability to click on Phainon or not. And this is where the issue with Dan Heng's summon comes in, because obviously a summon cannot click a character. The summon just automatically takes action and automatically does its thing. We have no control over summons like Lightning Lord and Fuyuan. We don't get to click on characters when the summon takes action, and thus the summon is unable to give Phainon any stacks of Core Flame. Dan Heng's summon could give a shield and give Phainon 50 energy and give Phainon 100 crit damage and give Phainon 20% defense ignore and action advance him, and it would still not be able to give Phainon any Core Flame stacks. It does not matter what the dragon does for Phainon. All that matters is that it is physically unable to target Phainon due to how it's coded in the game and due to how Phainon's Core Flame stack generation is coded in the game. No matter what buffs they give to the dragon summon, none of it will change the fact that Dan Heng is one of Phainon's worst Core Flame stack generators unless they completely change the coding of the interaction between the summon and Phainon's Core Flame stack generation. Even energy generating light cones like Shared Feeling and Quid Pro Quo can't give Phainon stacks because the energy portions of these light cones are an automatic effect and technically aren't targeting Phainon. Again, this is not a bug. This is just how Phainon's Core Flame stack generation has always worked. And the funny thing is, it was very easy to make Dan Heng work with Phainon still. Hoyo literally introduced the one way to make them synergize with each other: the path of remembrance. Remembrance characters have Mema Sprites, and Mema Sprites are basically regular summons like Lightning Lord, like Dan Heng's dragon, except they're actually able to take action and target allies or enemies. If Dan Heng's dragon was coded as a Mema Sprite instead of a regular summon, then every time the dragon took action, we would actually be able to control it, and we would be able to click on Phainon's character model in order to give him a Core Flame stack, just like Mem is able to. The solution was right there. This was one of the rare instances where a character would have actually heavily benefited from being in the new Remembrance path due to how the mechanic of Mema Sprites completely fixes the main issue in their kit, assuming Dan Heng was made to synergize with Phainon. However, it's too late to change his path now, and I heavily doubt they're going to change how his summon works since Mema Sprites are tied to the Remembrance path. Thus, I can only come to one conclusion. Hoyo specifically made Dan Heng to not synergize with Phainon. This is not a Phainon support. This character is not made for Phainon. Can he still slot into Phainon teams? Yes, but it is not because he's doing anything particularly outstanding for Phainon, and it's more so because Dan Heng is just a really good character character in general, especially with Sunday. And if you do slot him into Phainon teams, just be aware that you will require attacks from enemy RNG in order to give Phainon core flame stacks from the second rotation onwards, even if you spam skill on all your characters, including Dan Heng, because Dan Heng's core flame stack generation is just absolutely pitiful, and even worse than Huohuo. Leakers stated Dan Heng was made for Phainon, but my conclusion is, even if he was once upon a time supposed to be a sustain made to synergize with Phainon, that is absolutely not the case anymore. Dan Heng's kit was purposefully made in a way to not stack Phainon's ultimate, and I highly doubt Hoyo will change the coding of their game in order to fix this. Now, with all of that said, I want to end the video by making one thing very clear. Dan Heng is such a good character. I cannot emphasize enough how cool and strong this character feels for so many teams that aren't Phainon. In particular, Anaxa makes such good use of Dan Heng, and I personally think Dan Heng was more tailor-made for Anaxa than anyone else. Yes, there are memes about Anaxa stealing all of Phainon's supposed best supports, such as Saridra and Dan Heng, and it is true to some extent. Anaxa's kit just makes better use of these characters. But Anaxa isn't the only one who makes use of Dan Heng. Basically every single attack scaling DPS in the game, but particularly those who synergize with Sunday, will inherently have synergy with Dan Heng due to Dan Heng's synergy with Sunday. He's a Sunday buff more than anything, honestly. I don't think Dan Heng is power creeping the other sustains by any means. Huohuo can still outclass Dan Heng in terms of pure offensive utility, even in some Sunday teams, due to how powerful her energy generation is for the likes of Aglaya and Saber. And Aventurine can still generate more follow-up stacks for Phainon teams, but Dan Heng still manages to feel competitive with them in basically every single team, while being the single most comfortable option in terms of shielding and being completely skill point positive. Dan Heng is just so comfy and good for characters that aren't named Phainon, and I think that's really neat. As long as you stop viewing this character as a Phainon teammate, I think you'll really start to see his value, especially if he really does end up being a free sustain unit. I will once again say, there are some scenarios where a sustain will feel much more comfortable in Phainon teams, such as in the new endgame mode coming out, which has some incredibly hard-hitting enemies. In those scenarios, putting Dan Heng as the last slot in Phainon teams does feel necessary, but I want to once again emphasize the main point of this video. Dan Heng can slot into Phainon teams because Dan Heng is a strong general unit, not because Dan Heng has any synergy with Phainon. It's the same exact thing as the Tribi comparison. Tribi is always the strongest damage buffer for Phainon teams, simply because Tribi is such a powerful character, but she does not have any direct synergy with Phainon since she gives no core flame stacks. Unfortunately, Phainon just doesn't have that many premium characters that synergize directly with him outside of Sunday and Saridra, and as such, his vertical investment options are rather limited, and he ends up just using characters that aren't even made to synergize with him. But even so, Phainon is still a perfectly strong unit, and Dan Heng is also still a perfectly strong unit. Unfortunately, these two just weren't meant to be together, and it is what it is. I'll end things off by reminding everyone that this is still only version 1 of the beta. However, despite the fact that this is only version 1, I'll emphasize the fact that there is nothing wrong with Dan Heng's kit. It's just the way that he's coded is literally not made to synergize with Phainon, and I would highly advise you all to expect this to remain the same throughout the beta. If they do change the coding of this interaction, then that will be a very pleasant surprise. But as of this moment, just try not to think of Dan Heng as a Phainon specific teammate, and you'll be good to go, because he absolutely is not a Phainon specific teammate. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry this was a bit of a downer video, but I saw people making suggestions like just make the dragon give energy, and I needed to inform people on why the issue isn't with what the dragon does, but rather with how Phainon's core flame stacks are coded in the game. Again, the dragon could give 10 million buffs every time it takes action, and it still would not give a single core flame stack to Phainon. How do you feel about this? Do you think it's dumb? Do you think they'll actually change the coding? Leave a comment down below to let me know. And be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. I'll be keeping you all updated throughout the beta as Dan Heng and Evernight constantly get more changes. And I'll be making a whole video about some of the changes I'd like to see to Dan Heng's kit, even though I do genuinely think he's very strong and interesting as it is. So keep an eye out for that. Until next time!